We seem not to have done justice to that topic, so that's why I'm continuing today. But in case you're just joining us for the first time, you didn't see yesterday's show, let's quickly bring you what you need to know about the finance bill that was signed by Mr. President on the 13th of January 2020. Don't forget that there is somehow a historical background to this finance bill. The first time since we returned to democracy that a budget will be accompanied with a finance bill. But I must say that during the military administration, during the military regimes, some military rulers will accompany some kind of fiscal legislation, or I would say tax laws anyway. But since we returned to democracy, this is the first time that we're having a budget accompanied with a fiscal legislation. So what you need to know, do we have that card so that we can quickly take that? What was on the minds and perhaps mouths of people was that, oh, VAT has been increased from 5% to 7.5%. You will recall that news came out last year, late last year, when the president presented 2020 budget to the joint session of the National Assembly, and he did talk about some products, basic commodities, pharmaceutical products, as well as educational products or educational items also exempted from the finance, that's from VAT. VAT exempts pharmaceuticals, educational, as well as food items. Food items such as bread, fish, meat, water, milk, and some starch meals like our popular gari. You don't need to pay VAT on that. The government said that 5 strategic objectives of the new finance law, as you can see right now, is to support MSMEs, also grow the business environment. We shouldn't have a retrogressive tax environment. The new law is also meant to incentivize infrastructure as well as capital market investment. So Taiwo Oyedele will be joining me in a bit to take a look at that. Let's quickly take this break, and when we come back, he will join me on the program. Let's continue to break this bill down for you, viewers. But don't forget that you can join us on all our social media platforms. You can find us on YouTube. Go to our YouTube page, Moneyline with Nancy. You can watch previous editions of this program on YouTube. Don't forget to click that button so that whenever we download a video, you get the notification. On Facebook, we're there, Moneyline with Nancy. On Twitter, Moneyline AIT. On Twitter, I am there right about now. It's here, it's here. Social media is just here, so you can buzz me on Twitter, Nancy Ilo. You can also buzz me at Moneyline AIT. Send your questions now. Send your questions right now, and your comments and your views. Any question, anything that is not clear to you as regarding this finance bill, I need you to send your questions now so that we can attend to it. Let's quickly take this break. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back. In case you're just joining us, it's still Moneyline with Nancy. Earlier on, I did talk about the finance bill. We're going to be breaking it down. And the other half of the program, it's another Wednesday, so we'll be having the CBN weekly segment. In fact, what we've done is that we've put together the 2019 MPC. So we're doing 2019 MPC review on today's CBN's weekly segment so that you take a look at the history of 2019 and the direction of MPC. The central bank has rescheduled the MPC. It's slated for Monday and Tuesday next week to Thursday and Friday next week. That's 23rd and 24th of next week, which will be the first MPC meeting for January. But for CBN's weekly segment today, we'll be taking a look at 2019 in review. All right, let's get started. Taiwo Oyedele is joining me right now from PricewaterhouseCoopers in Lagos. Mr. Oyedele, good to see you again from Lagos. How is Lagos? How is Eko?
Yes, Lagos is good.
Eko Nibaje, isn't it? All right,
yes, indeed.
Yes, let's continue. In fact, we had an interesting conversation yesterday, and a lot of people sent a couple of questions. A lot of people, in fact, I noticed since the president signed it, so much has been trending on social media. Some really do not understand what the finance bill is. Of course, a lot of people talking about, it's the 7.5 VAT increase. But I must tell our viewers that you are also part of the crafters of this bill. Yes or no?
That's correct.
That's correct. So you're the right person to talk to and perhaps knock you if we need to knock you so that you transmit that knocking to the, to the government. All right. For those that did not watch this show yesterday, I just want you to give like a 1 minute, 2 minutes recap of what we discussed yesterday, the early part of what we discussed. I did ask you the question, who will pay the VAT of 7.5%, who will collect it? I did also ask you about the TIN, the tax identification number, the 25 million naira below turnover, zero CIT rate. So I want you just to give a summary of what we talked about yesterday before we move to other things.
Okay, yeah, indeed. I think the starting point is to remind listeners that this law has not taken effect because it has not been published in the gazette. So which means everything continues to be the way it has always been, including VAT rates will continue to be at 5%. But we expect that there will be an announcement very soon as to the commencement date of the bill, which is now an act. And some of the points we had discussed before is that once the law takes effect, the VAT rate will go up to 7.5%. But the good news is that for many of the basic food items, from the yam you buy to the bread and your milk and cereal, you will not even have to pay VAT because VAT is now exempted on some of those items. For instance, under the old law, if you bought bread, you were supposed to pay VAT. But under the new law, you no longer pay VAT, which means this is not just an increase of VAT rate from 5 to 7.5%. For some items and some products, it's actually a reduction from 5% to 0% once the new law comes into effect. And for small businesses where your annual turnover, that's your sales, is less than 25 million naira a year, that's about 70,000 naira per day, you will no longer be required to register for VAT or charge VAT on your goods and services, which means whatever you are selling and your services that you render will become more affordable to your customers. And that way, small businesses are better able to grow without the burden of tax compliance. But it doesn't mean that you will not pay VAT if you have to buy things like recharge card, you want to buy a mobile phone for your business, or even paying for electricity tariff to power your businesses and your homes. So essentially, it's a give and take thing, if you ask, because government also needs revenue. That's why the need for 7.5% reason. But at the same time, government is trying to ensure that the burden does not fall significantly on people at the bottom of the ladder, but more on the middle class and the upper class echelon of society.
You know, we argued this yesterday, Mr. Oyedele, in terms of the vulnerability of the bottom of the pyramid, and you're coming again with it. You know, it's the government, yes, selling wholly to us that the bottom of the pyramid, those that earn less than $2 a day, would not by any means be affected by this Finance Act as signed by Mr. President. It's, you know, we're talking of electricity. I did mention yesterday, in case for those of us that perhaps will not even notice, if I go to buy my electricity bill, there will now be a 7.5% VAT for me to pay. And supposedly, all of us should pay for electricity in the country. NEC, except if something is being done, as the reps are on next neck now, not to go ahead with the tariff hike by perhaps April of this year. That means we'll pay more. So you have an increase in electricity tariffs, there's increase in VAT, which my mom too would pay for.
Yes. So of course, you have some items that the prices are regulated or fixed, if you like to call it that way. And that would be examples such as, you know, when you buy petrol at the pump. The same thing applies to electricity tariff because the price and the tariffs are regulated. So I'm hoping that even with the increase in VAT rate to 7.5%, it should not translate into having to pay more for electricity for the vast majority of Nigerians. But this is not something that we can take to the bank. It depends on how government wants to implement it. Government, if they decide to take care of the extra burden, then it will be that government will further subsidize electricity tariff. I think it's not correct to say that the poor people will not bear any burden whatsoever, because like I said, if you buy a recharge card, you know, to make calls, because it's not like mobile phone and making calls is limited to middle class and the upper class. Everybody has a right to be able to make communication and even use the internet. So you buy data to use internet just to get access to information, which also helps to promote education, financial inclusion, and reduce inequality. So which means, in fact, there's a greater need for such facilities by people at the bottom of the ladder. And currently, that is not being exempted from VAT. So you have to bear the burden of VAT increase on those items. But if you put it all together, in the whole schemes of things for a poor person in Nigeria, you know, which according to some data, we have around 120 million people living below poverty line. For them, the amount of money they spend on, you know, electricity, on communication, data for the internet, it's not a significant portion of their household consumption. We have some data that shows that Nigeria is actually number one in the world for the percentage of household income that we spend on food. So food is our number one priority in Nigeria. So once you've taken care of food, you've taken care of, you know, rent, you've taken care of education, medical and pharmaceutical products, I think you pretty much cover what is most important to our poorest people.
Would the landlords take 7.5% VAT on their rents? These are issues that affect us.
So luckily for yes, so luckily for your residential rent, you don't have to pay VAT. So
I hope the landlords are hearing now.
Course,
landlords and landladies. Landlords and landladies.
Yes. So if you rent, So if you rent, if you have a place where you're doing your business and you're paying rent, unfortunately your rent would attract VAT at 7.5%. But for residential rent, you don't need to pay VAT. So your landlord will not increase your rent because of this. If they do, tell them they're wrong. Because Nigerians can take advantage of this to increase everything now.
That's why I asked that question. However, it's not a mundane question, very important, because you see everybody, even the woman in the marketplace now, may just have the garage would shoot up. And if you ask her, she say, did you hear that tax has increased? But of course, garage is tax, yes, VAT exempt. So we really need to put this information through. Now, very important, how important is this finance bill at this time? Bearing in mind that this is one bill that holistically looked at our tax laws in terms of, I think, amending about 7 different tax laws, which have, I think, over 50 sections or 56 sections, if I'm not mistaken, and over 80 amendments. Yeah. So how important is the timing right now?
Okay. Yeah. So I didn't hear the last bit of your question, but I guess you're just asking about how important this new law is to our tax system and the way we fund government budget. And my answer to that is it's very significant and very important. And this is something that some of us wish we had been doing every single year for the past 20 years since we began this current democratic dispensation. But that hasn't been the case. In most countries around the world, when you talk about the budget, you talk about how do you raise the revenue. When you talk about revenue, you talk about tax, and every other things will be secondary. But unfortunately, in Nigeria, when we talk about the budget, we talk about the revenue to fund it, we talk about oil price and production estimate per day, and then we go to sleep. And it took us so long to realize that we cannot run our economy on uncertainties of the volatility to do with the price of oil, and even sometimes with the volumes that we're able to produce on a daily basis. And in fact, if the price of oil was to be stable according to our budget and we produce the volume that we plan to produce, we'll still be poor. So ultimately, it means that for this Nigeria to be the country that we want it to be, we have to start going back to pay attention to our tax system. And this doesn't mean that we have to pay more taxes. It means that we have to be more deliberate how we design the tax system, how we raise tax revenue, and of course, how those revenues are utilized for the purposes of infrastructure, human capital development, and generally providing social services to our people. So I do think that this finance bill, now an act, is a very good step forward. And hopefully, like Mr. President has promised, we're able to sustain it on an annual basis such that every single year as we have our budget, we also have the finance bill.
I was actually coming to that because I know in some other climes, when they have their budgets, they also have a finance bill attached to it. So a lot of countries do it even annually, yearly, as they present the New Year expenditure. So we're hoping that that will continue. Not that this would also, as the president signed it this 2020, it will take a few years down the line again, perhaps to review and all of that.
Yes. In fact, one of the comments that the lawmakers made when we were having the public hearing for this finance bill was they had requested that, going forward, the finance bill should actually come ahead of the budget presentation, because it makes sense to me, actually, because this time around, they struggled to get the finance bill to be passed along with the budget. So that was why they presented the budget to Mr. President first for assent before they sent the finance bill. And unfortunately, the finance bill could not commence on the 1st of January, because if you have a budget commencing 1st of January, it would have been more ideal and appropriate for the finance bill to also commence 1st of January. And I think the executive has taken that feedback positively to say, going forward, they will try their best to make sure the finance bill is even sent ahead of the budget. Since you have your MTEP, you already know what you plan to spend over the next few years, and therefore you can as well, from your fiscal strategy papers around revenue generation, present a finance bill. And of course, one thing government needs to do differently going forward with regards to the finance bill is to have even more engagement with stakeholders, private sector, and all other people who have a stake in the tax system well ahead of the presentation of the finance bill. And then, of course, once you have it all together, you need to do a lot more awareness, sensitization, and communication. Those are some of the areas for improvement, in my view.
That's where my show comes in handy. That's where I think NOA should up their game in terms of communication. Mr. Oyedele smiling. Yes, my show comes in handy now.
I agree with you. You're doing an excellent job.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Now, let's go back a bit, because a lot of people, even on social media, concerning this finance bill, it hits our money. I don't think even for you as a tax practitioner, to pay your tax is also difficult. To pay your tax, to bring out the money is difficult. Even for me, I would think twice. You understand what I mean? So it's hitting people where their heart is, where their money is. Speak to our viewers again, especially as it concerns their bank accounts, that without tax identification numbers, they may not be able to operate their bank accounts. We looked at that yesterday, but I just want you to reiterate it, especially for those that do not understand, you know, whether it's a corporate or a personalized account in a bank.
Yes. Yeah, no, I think it's a very important point. First and foremost, you know, I need to make a comment about your initial comment around it's difficult to bring out money to pay taxes because it's painful, and that is true. It's not only true of Nigerians and in Nigeria, it is true globally. Anybody who has worked hard for their money does not want to part with it. But here's the dynamic. All the developed countries in the world that we aspire to be like, whether you're talking about the US, the UK, Germany, Norway, Sweden, Australia, these are countries that have been developed largely on the back of taxes. So, and their tax rates are even high. Yet people aspire and dream and hope to go and live in those countries, which means really, as much as people hate paying taxes, they are not running away from paying taxes. What they actually want is to pay taxes and see it translate into better life, quality of living, and development generally. So I do think that we need to get to a point quickly in Nigeria where the approach and the mindset is we have to pay our taxes because it's the right thing to do, and then hold government to account in how the taxes are utilized. So the question on tax identification number, I think it's important for us to clarify because there's a lot of information out there in the media, social media, a lot of it not very accurate. So what the Finance Act actually says is that if you operate a personal account or you want to open a personal account, and this personal account, you would use it for business purposes, then you must obtain a tax identification number. And I think this is equitable because corporate accounts, people who open corporate accounts cannot even open those accounts without having a team. Because when you say your account is for business, it means that you intend to make money and profit. And so you must pay taxes. Whereas you also have people who use their personal accounts as individuals for business purposes. They do buying and selling. In fact, they even have, some of them have 1 or 2 staff. They pay salaries from there, and they are not even registered with the tax authority. So this is not fair. And so this law is saying that anybody and everybody, whether your account is corporate or is personal, to the extent that you're using it for business, you must obtain TIN.
Now, let's take a look at the implications for, we did that yesterday, but let's take a look at the implications for startups. I chose my word carefully, you know, for startups. What are the implications for startups and perhaps employees of startups? You understand what I mean, Mr. Oyedele?
Yes. Yeah, for startups, you know, because startups are really, in Nigeria, we have currently over 40 million MSMEs, according to Bureau of Statistics. But then also the data is that about 6 out of 10 of those small businesses will go under within the first 5 years. So which means, one, sometimes it's difficult to start a business, and even after starting, there's no guarantee that you will survive beyond 3 to 5 years. So it's important how we treat startups. Now, one, as a startup, unless you are starting big, and there's nothing wrong with starting big, but if you are starting like most startups, you would expect that your turnover in a year, your sales or your income, is likely going to be under 25 million for the vast majority of MSMEs. So which means you no longer need to register for VAT. You don't need to charge VAT. You don't need to worry about filing returns for VAT. In addition to that, your company's income tax, if you register a company as for your startup, your rate will now be 0% from 30% before. And another very important point is we used to have a provision in the law that we call commencement rule, which means when you start a new business, this provision in the law, ironically, makes you pay tax twice within the first 3 years of commencing business. So they have now removed this anomaly from the law. So the New Finance Act says if you start your business, you don't need to pay double taxation. So overall, I would say the Finance Act is also positive for startups. With regards to their employees and staff of startups, now, unfortunately, there's not a lot of amendments in the Finance Act to deal with personal income tax, including startups and their employees. The only provision that may be relevant is that if anything happens to a startup and they have to fold up and they are paying people for, for layoffs, the Finance Act says any amount you receive that is under 10 million naira as compensation for loss of employment or whatever it is, you will not have to pay any tax whatsoever on that amount. You can use that to take care of yourself pending where you find another job. But I do know that our startups are not praying to lay off people, but these things happen.
Now, perhaps for companies to recoup the increase in VAT to 7.5%, companies may likely increase the prices of commodities and services to recoup. How do you think that we should handle this? Because it will come up definitely.
Yes. So, because people are, they are economic animals and they are rational. So if your cost goes up, you want to preserve your margin. You don't want your profit to go down. So if you can, you will then find a way to pass on that increase to another person, which in most cases will be the consumer. Where the prices are, sensitive, when the demand for your goods and services are price sensitive, I envisage that, the producers and the manufacturers and the service provider will bear the burden of this 2.5% increase in VAT. But where they can, they will simply pass it on to consumers. I would imagine, for example, on GSM, airtime, and data, they're going to pass it on because people will just continue to make calls and use data. Whereas you may imagine that for some more basic items that are not exempted, the producers may want to bear the cost. So if you are a manufacturer of beer, for example, you want to pass the cost to the consumers. But if you provide some other services that are, price sensitive, you then want to bear the cost. I think overall it will be a split of the impact, the larger burden being that of the consumers, and in some cases, the manufacturers and service providers will bear part of the cost.
Okay, what would you say about the argument that it's inappropriate for the government at this time to compel companies that are making losses, not making a lot of profits, to pay an increment in taxes, VAT?
Yeah,
it's part of the knocks of this.
It is Margaret. Yes. So it is Margaret Michelle who said that death, childbirth, and taxes. There's never any convenient time for any of them. So there will never be a time when people say we are now ready, increase our taxes. So the question of timing would always come up. So I do not think that the most important thing is the timing. The most important thing is the design of the impact of the increase in the tax rate. If you design the impact to not fall on the poorest people, and then you have done a good job. Because overall, if you think about what we're saying, if you exempt, if you ask small businesses not to charge VAT, you would also imagine that most of their customers are people at the lower level of the ladder in society, which actually means that a lot of our poor people, apart from the basic food item that's exempt, would also not even pay VAT on some of the other things that they buy from other small businesses. So which means that overall, our poor people are actually better off under the 7.5% regime than they were under 5%. So I do not think that the timing issue is the most important thing. You also need to bear in mind that government is under pressure now to look for more money to pay minimum wage. So long as you're going to pay minimum wage, you can't just print naira. You have to generate that money from somewhere. So I would play down on the timing question.
You just hit my next question. Minimum wage issue, 7.5% VAT. A minimum wage, 30,000 naira, is still perhaps in limbo. Some states are saying they may pay, they may not pay. As it is right now, we don't know the left from the right. So you are giving with the right hand, you are using left hand to take from the back. 7.5% VAT on 30,000 naira minimum wage. Nigerian workers, worse off, isn't it? Inflation spiking high.
Yeah, yeah, I do think that, maybe it's not a direct give with one hand and take it back with the other hand. I expect that anybody who is earning minimum wage has to be more, careful about what they consume and not consume luxury items, even though it's their discretion on what they do with their money. So if you earn 30,000 naira minimum wage or 40 or 50,000 naira a month, I would expect that the vast majority of what you consume will be on food, will be on education, will be on electricity, a bit of telecommunication, and therefore the increase should not impact you significantly as to erode the increase in your minimum wage. So I also heard the point about inflation. Part of it is down to the border closure that has affected the price of some of the items that we used to import before, and therefore affecting the inflation, particularly for food, which is now over 14%.
Okay.
So this combined effect would reduce the buying capacity of the minimum wage, but I still think overall there will be a real increase in minimum wage once all the states are able to pay. People have to demand the extra money that the states are going to be getting from this VAT. They need to explain how they're spending it if they're not paying minimum wage.
Okay, Ms. Oyedele, just take 45 seconds to go through this Finance Act and perhaps the impact on the capital market. There's the impact on insurance, petroleum profit tax, and all of that in 45 seconds, because I'd like to ask you two more questions before we go, and we've really got to go.
Okay. Yeah, I'll say for the capital market, it's also a number of provisions there to promote activities in the capital market, like such as the introduction of some securities that we didn't used to have, and then some of them, like real estate investment trusts, are now tax transparent, which means there will be more motivation for investors to float those kind of securities on the stock market, and then for people to invest in them and make money for themselves while the stock market can develop. For insurance companies, it's now being treated equitably as other companies. So running insurance should not be a crime, and that's what the Finance Act has done to try and treat the insurance sector fairly and also equitably, like other sectors such as banking, manufacturing, and the rest of them.
Now, when this came out, what came to my mind is the Executive Order 007. You remember? Yes, you remember. Private companies, like an incentive for private companies that want to, perhaps like build roads and all of that. And I know I discussed this topic with you sometime last year. Is this Finance Act in any way going to impact them, bearing in mind that they are going to have some kind of tax credit? So and I also believe that for companies to undertake those kind of projects, build roads and all of that, they will be in the categories of over 100 million, which their CITs should be 30%. With that Executive Order 007, was that also put in mind with this Finance Act?
No, not really. Even though the issues are connected to the extent that the Finance Act, one of the objectives is to provide incentive for, construction, infrastructure development, and the capital market. But the credit, the road construction credit scheme that government did with the executive order you mentioned, only just targeting very large companies, because you can't be a small company and be constructing road. You will not have those kind of resources. And for those large companies, their CIT rate has not been reduced, so it remains 30%. So which means some of the incentives under this Finance Act are not targeted at large companies, because again, like we said, government needs revenue, and if they keep giving away their tax base, then that will be difficult to accomplish.
You would also recall that FIRS last year revealed that there will be 5% VAT for online transactions. There's a new chair right now, so we don't even know where that is. But perhaps if the FIRS is going to go ahead with that, that means it's going to be 7.5% for online transactions.
Yes, for online transaction, there's already, the law does not discriminate between offline transaction and online transaction, which means if you go to a corner shop to buy something, you pay tax and VAT. If you buy it online, you should also pay your VAT. So the FRS, the Finance Act has not provided anything to enable the FRS direct banks and payment platforms like card providers to start deducting the 7.5% VAT. So which means whatever way we're paying VAT for online transactions will continue, but the rate will now be 7.5%. What we do have in the Finance Act is a provision that says if a foreigner is providing, digital transactions to customers in Nigeria, the Ministry of Finance, the Minister for Finance, would define whether such a foreign entity has significant economic presence in Nigeria. And if they do, they'll be required to pay income taxes in Nigeria. So what you actually have in the Finance Act does not change how we tax VAT on online transactions, whether those are transactions you buy locally or abroad.
Okay. Finally, two questions in one. If a contractor, a government contractor that has been owed, that has done a job, let's say in the last 5 years, or even last year or 2 years ago, and is being paid now, what VAT rate will be charged? Is this 7.5%? Bearing in mind that that job has been done, so you need to take. I see you smiling. I caught you there. Do you understand? I don't know if you guys, crafters of that, took that into cognizance. What VAT rate will that person pay? Then the second part of my question is, how will this new Finance Act impact people like you that are tax practitioners, tax consultants, and all of that? Is it that you guys will make more money now, and it's a lucrative job to come into?
Okay, I don't know about that. Maybe you come and find out. Yes, so to your first question, it's a very important question. That's why I was smiling. So the value-added tax law, which is what, the Finance Act, for example, is not a standalone law. It's only just amending the tax laws. So the value-added tax law, the trigger point for VAT is the supply. So when you supply a good or a service, you charge VAT. So if you had worked for government or your customers or anybody, even private sector companies, and you have already rendered the service or you have delivered the goods, but they haven't paid you or you have not even raised the invoice, it doesn't matter when you are being paid or when you are raising the invoice, it will carry 5%. Because as at the time the service was supplied or the goods were delivered, the VAT rate applicable as of that time is 5%. Whatever you now do going forward after this new law comes into effect will then carry 7.5%. As to whether consultants such as us would, should benefit from the Finance Act, there, because in a way you find that a lot of places no longer have to pay company income tax, they don't have to charge VAT, which means they probably will not even need tax consultants anymore. But then it also means that consultants and tax intermediaries have to start thinking about how do you add value to your customers and your clients than just trying to file returns and asking them to pay VAT and CIT. In developed countries, these things we are doing are not strange, and yet people in professional services are still doing well, because as the economy grows, so will be the need for you to request for financial advice about how to manage your affairs. And there are a lot of things you can do in terms of tax planning to make sure that you do not get into trouble. And that's where consultants come in.
Thank you very much, Mr. Oyedele. Nice chatting with you today again. I hope that our viewers have gotten some kind of insight, and the misconceptions have been seen, especially in the social media space, has been put to rest. I hope that our viewers have been a little bit enlightened and informed, as well as educated about this Finance Act as signed by Mr. President. Mr. Oyedele, enjoy your day, and send me hi to your colleagues there in Lagos.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I will. Sure.
All right. I've been speaking with Taiwo Oyedele, senior partner at PricewaterhouseCoopers. We've tried as much as possible to break down the Finance Act now. We started yesterday. So in case you didn't watch yesterday's one, go to YouTube. Go to YouTube. Yes, I'm speaking to you. Go to it right now so that you can watch and you see how that affects you. All right, let's quickly take our CBN Weekly segment. I told you earlier on that we'll be looking at the 2019 MPC review. The first meeting will be held next week. That's the first meeting for this year will be held next week. Don't forget that last year, MPR was, reduced once. That is, we had a change to MPR only once last year, and that came in March. After about 3 years and so, the MPC did bring down MPR, that's monetary policy rates. The cards you're seeing right now are key takeaways from the MPC meetings of last year. We decided to bring it to you, a 2019 MPC review, so that you will understand where we are coming from. You recall that the MPC kept rates at 14% for a while, and they reduced it to about 13.5% last year. Also last year, the MPC directed the Apex Bank to limit deposit money banks' access to government securities, also redirect their focus to lending. You know about LDR, it was brought down to about 60, then taken again to 65%. All that came last year. The MPC also did call on the CBN to put in modalities to promote consumers as well as mortgage lending. The MPC also urged the federal government to build fiscal buffers. Our FX reserves are standing around $39 to $38 billion right now. We'll pray, because we always pray our warriors in the country, that our price will continue to increase so that we can have more money. Today it's trading around over $60 a barrel. So I'll be leaving you with the 2019 MPC review to see how Godwin Emefiele, the central bank governor, who is the MPC chair, and his colleagues handled 2019 MPC decisions. I'll see you all tomorrow. God willing, so be the best you can be able to change you want to see. But don't also forget that the conversation continues online, so you can chat with me online. You can also follow us on Facebook. You can check out previous editions of the program on YouTube. I am Nancy Nnaji. I'll see you all again tomorrow. Bye now.
It's not about criticizing, it's about reassessing our position to say, look, is there any merit in the need to begin to say that we should look at free floating the currency or allow free import of goods that can be produced into Nigeria? The Monetary Policy Committee came to a conclusion that this was a wrong premise. We cannot be talking about allowing import of items that can be produced in the country today, exporting jobs from Nigeria to foreign countries, and we say we have the interest of Nigeria at heart. We don't agree with anybody. We don't agree with that. It is a wrong premise to say you will allow import to just flood the country just because you want to please anybody. That is not our interest. And we have always said it, that we are apolitical. We will remain apolitical, but we do not want anybody to drag the central bank into issues that is within our remit. Otherwise, we'll respond to it. We are ready to welcome anybody that is ready to come and invest in Nigeria, both local and foreign. You need Naira loan, we will give you intervention fund to set up this project. We will provide you foreign exchange to import the plants and equipment that you need to produce these goods and services in Nigeria. We would, about 2 weeks ago, I wrote to the bank, the governors in the south and the southeastern belt of Nigeria. I said, it has come to the time where we must stop the importation of crude palm oil into Nigeria. Crude palm oil per barrel is more expensive than crude oil that all of us are today running after. Okay? And we said we will re-establish the oil palm belt in the south and southeastern part of Nigeria. And Edo State has has reacted positively, and some of the southern states are also reacting positively. With the support and intervention from the CBN, supported by the government, we would reverse the trend. That should be the direction. I thought it's important to say this so people can understand that the Central Bank of Nigeria, that the government, that the economy is doing well. Yes, a lot of work still needs to be done. There's still a couple of vulnerabilities and fragilities that we see in the Nigerian economy, but we are determined to resolve these issues. But we will continue to crave the support of everybody to please fly with us in these areas. Recovery and Growth Plan, leaving room for continued debt servicing not previously envisaged. Against this backdrop, it is imperative for monetary policy to provide the much-needed leverage to support output growth and employment generation in the country. On a more cautious note, the committee expressed concern and sympathizes with the fiscal authorities over the growing fiscal deficit, external debt and debt services, as well as the need to closely monitor the public pronouncement process in order to improve efficiency in public resource management. On financial system stability, the MPC noted the improvements in key financial soundness indicators and commended the federal government for the settlement of debt owed to oil marketers, which has considerably helped in reducing the non-performing loans portfolio in the banking industry. Committee therefore urged the government to expedite action in addressing all outstanding contractor-related arrears so as to improve the NPL position and stabilize the banking system. In addition, the MPC reiterated the bank's commitment to improve credit delivery, especially to small and medium-scale enterprises, while acknowledging efforts by the Central Bank of Nigeria in coordinating the de-risking of lending to the private sector through collaboration between the Bankers Committee and the NIRSAL. In its consideration of the best monetary policy option, the committee noted the need for all agencies of government to work hard, not only in consolidating the growth so far achieved, but also in ensuring that appropriate policies are put in place and implemented to create jobs on a mass scale, as well as diversify the economy in the proper direction. In doing this, the policy options facing the MPC at this meeting is a decision between retention of the current stance of monetary policy or a slight loosening at the policy rate, backed by the substantial stability of the major macroeconomic indicators. The committee felt that given the relative stability in the key macroeconomic variables, there is a need to signal a new direction, and in which case we're talking about being pro-growth. In its argument, the committee was convinced that doing this would further uphold the bank's commitment to promoting strong growth by way of encouraging credit flow to the productive sectors of the economy. The MPC also felt that signaling through loosening by a marginal rate would serve to manage the sentiments in the capital flow markets owing to the wider spread in yields in the emerging market and developing economies relative to the advanced economies. Moreover, the real interest rates would still remain positive. We've seen what we can call a relative improvement in macroeconomic variables in Nigeria, exchange rate being stable, reserves looking good, inflation moderating downwards. But it's also important for me to say that there are still challenges ahead. If we consider that notwithstanding the improvement in macroeconomic variables, that inflation still has its own pressures arising for issues bordering on prices and supply shortages for food, issues bordering on unemployment,